Would you welcome our speaker tonight, Nathan Harmon? Come on, give him a tour.
Thank God, man. Thank you. Wow, man, so many faces here. Welcome. Hey, everybody, before we get started, I want everybody to stand up. Stand up, everyone stand up, everyone stand up. Now sit back down. Now, I want everyone to stand back up, stand back up, stand back up. Now, I'm serious. Now, no, hey, everyone's not standing back up. Everyone stand back up. Now sit back down. Okay. Now, I want everybody to raise both their hands up, hands up, hands up, hands down. Now, I know, and there is no zero reason, I know 110% that you're not frozen, you're not stuck, you're not unable to move. Listen, a lot of times in life, we allow fear, we allow discomfort, we allow the mask, we allow what people's opinions of us to hold us hostage. And there's a lot of times, especially when we're young men or young ladies or old men or old ladies or people that don't want to reveal our age people. We care so much about the opinions of people and what will others think about us. And so often what I've learned in my story and in my journey, my personal walk, is that, man, for too long I wore this mask, man. And I cared so much about what you thought about me. And I allowed your opinions of me to hold me hostage. And tonight, as we just go through this and we live life together, and as we just get real and raw, because this is what I've learned, real knows real. Real knows real. And what I said this morning is a principle that I've lived on, is that God is super and we are natural, and when we work with Him, supernatural things happen. And that you plus God will always be the majority. But now that I wanted to kind of set that baseline there, that, listen, I know too often we wear this mask, and sometimes, man, when God begins to tug on heartstrings, when God begins to tug on streams in your mind, when the Holy Spirit's speaking to your heart and to your mind about choices and things and this and that, instantly the enemy wants to say, yeah, but what will everybody else think? Yeah, but can I really talk to my youth pastor? Yeah, can I really talk to my pastor? Yeah, can I really talk to my mom? Can I really talk to my dad? Can I really talk to my sister? Can I really open up my mouth? Because what will they think about me? And I'm telling you, I promise you, it is a lie. The mask is a lie. We think the mask is keeping us safe, but it's the very thing that can paralyze us mentally and emotionally. It can hold you hostage. Okay, I digress for a minute. My name is Nathan Harmon. I'm from Indiana. It's my first time ever speaking publicly in Wisconsin. Yeah, man, yeah. And so Your Life Speaks is an organization that we started 5 years. We'll talk about it later. But God just opened up a lot of amazing doors. I travel the country and speak in high schools and middle schools and elementary schools. That freaked me out when I first started talking to elementary kids, but I learned how to do it because my wife's amazing. I speak in churches and Christian conferences and festivals, and God just allowed me to travel and to do some amazing things. In the last two school years, I've been honored and privileged by God's grace and love and Him opening up doors. I've been in over 400 schools, high schools and middle schools all across this nation in the last 2 school years. I'm currently, by God's favor ain't fair, y'all. God's favor ain't fair. And I know sometimes people get upset with followers of Jesus, man, but listen, God's favor ain't fair. And I've been blessed the last 2 school years, this school year and last school year, to be the #1 book school speaker in this nation. And it's just by God's grace, man. And so, hopefully we're able to come back up here and do some of the community schools and do a lot of schools in Wisconsin. It normally happens when I get into one school in a state, it just grows like wildfire, and I end up doing the entire state, a whole lot of schools, man. But it wasn't always this way. It wasn't always this way. And before I really dig into this tonight, I want to show this next slide because God's blessed me with an amazing wife and amazing kids. My wife, Alexis, she's right here. My daughter, Juliana, which, praise God, she's in the nursery, which is the craziest thing ever. And my son, Ashton, probably on cue, she's going to come crawling out here right now. We're potty training her right now. She just stepped in the toilet. My wife's upset because I shared that, but listen, I'm just real, man. I'm transparent. I'm just absolutely, there's no filter. There's sometimes a filter. But listen, man, too often we care so much about what other people think about us. And I know who my Father says I am. I know who God says I am. So I don't care about your opinion of me. Like I know who I am. And I don't care about the words or your thoughts or your ideas. At the end of the day, you can think what you want to think and you can say what you want to say. My value system doesn't come from you. And too often in our society, in this culture, in this generation, not just the young, but the old alike, we put our value system on what people think about us. I don't care what people think about me. And so sometimes maybe I'm not the most sophisticated, and sometimes I may make up some words. That's okay, because you won't say anything because I'm in the middle of talking. And sometimes, I may misspeak or misspoke, or I make up a word like tooken. And my wife told me the word tooken isn't a word when we first got together. The word take and tooken should be a word, but I've learned it's not. And I try not to use it too often anymore. I'm trying to grow. See, we're not after perfect people, but we're after people that are willing to just say, God, use me. I want to progress in you. Every day, I just want to be a little bit better. My life wasn't always this way, though. You see, growing up, I was raised in a church. My mom and my dad, I'm a kid from Indiana. I live now in Kokomo, Indiana. That's not a Beach Boys song. It's where I live. But I was raised in a place, it is a Beach Boys song, but it's also where I live. But I was raised in a place called Marion, Indiana. And let me ask this question, because I ask a lot of questions, especially when I do schools, assemblies, or anywhere I go, man. You see, even though I'm here with the microphone, like we're all in this together, man. Like this is us living life together. Community is everything. None of us in here are meant to be an island. Like you're not an island and you can't do this on your own. We're connected. Relationships, community is everything. I always say it this way: you show me your friends and I will tell you who you are. Who you surround yourself with matters. I'm an Indiana kid. Let me ask this question. How many of you in here, young and old alike, do you currently, as you sit in these seats, do you come from a separated, or broken, or divorced, but your biological mom and dad are not together today? Raise your hand. Yep, lots of us, absolutely. I've spoken to over nearly 1 million students in the last 5 years. Every school that I go to, over 60 or 70% of the hands in every school comes from broken communities. Let me ask this question. All of you that raised your hand that come from a broken family, how many of you can honestly say that if you're going to be real with yourself, like how many of you that come from a broken family can say that it's affected you, it's hurt you, it's harmed you, it's angered you, it's frustrated you, it's caused you to feel some type of way in your journey? Raise your hand. Yeah, you see, me too. I come from a family of 4, and it was mom, dad, sister, and me, and my dad and my mother and my sister. See, maybe I was naive, and maybe I came from maybe just a little bit of just being too young to really understand, but I thought I had a picture-perfect family. My parents never fought in front of me. I thought I had a cookie-cutter family. And my dad, he was an icon to me. He was my rock star. He was my hero. And as I grew up, I looked up to him, and we were in a youth group, and my dad did some speaking in the church there in Indiana. And, I heard about Jesus, and I heard about God, and I was raised in this, and I kind of had an understanding of who he was through this book, and the words grace and mercy and love and forgiveness. I heard it over and over and over again. But my parents set me down at about 12 years old. And in every single one of you sitting in here, from the front, the back, the left to the right, every one of us in this room right now, there are things that I call moments of impact. Moments of impact are moments in our lives when something good or something bad happens. But when that moment happens, when that event, that single occurrence, maybe it's when you were a young man and you won the championship, or you aced a test, something good or positive, when you went on vacation as a family, it was a good memory, it was a good moment. Or these moments of impact happen through tragedy and disasters and struggles, like a parent's getting divorced, or a best friend losing their life in an accident, or a grandparent losing their life, or somebody moving away. When there are good or bad things that happen, there are moments in all of our lives that it's like the details are just more vivid. You remember the people that were around you, the clothes that were on your back, the conversations that were being spoken. The details are just more vivid. They stand out above the mundane rest of your journey called life. Moments of impact. And many of us in here, I would say, if you could think back in your story, in your journey, in your life, if you're a young man or a young lady, or if you're an old man or an old lady, or someone who doesn't want to admit to what you are, you've had moments of impact in your life. And I sat down at this family table because my parents called a family meeting. And I remember when I sat there and my dad was to my right, my mom was across from me, and my sister was to my left. And my back was to the stove and to the sink and to the fridge. And I was sitting at this wooden table that my dad had built. It was handcrafted. It was a beautiful table. I hated the table though because we moved a lot across the state of Indiana. And my father, he would never get a moving crew. He would only get the Nathan crew. Thanks, Dad. The decorations on the kitchen wall were the ugliest, most hideous thing I've ever seen in my entire life. Giant ceramic 1970 pieces of faded fruit. What? Like, what are the, what? But I remember every detail. Because Mom looked at Dad and Dad looked at me. And they began to share with me about a separation or a divorce that was going to happen in my life. And see, growing up, I was never allowed in my parents' bedroom. It was a place that they said, Nathan, because if you get to know me on a personal level, my wife would probably agree, and my team around me, I have one speed. I call it squirrel. And it was way worse when I was younger. And so my mother and father said, listen, we need to have a place that we can like turn you off. And I was never allowed in their bedroom, ever. I never even saw the bedroom door open, not one or two times. Like I never saw their door open. I'm over here spilling water, aren't I? I'm about to kick it over. Let it rain. But the reason I was never allowed is because behind that bedroom door was where the verbal, the mental, and the emotional abuse happened in my family. Behind the bedroom doors where the drugs and the alcohol happened in my family. And as I began to ask questions and I found out the truth about who my mother and my father were and some of the marital problems that they had, I looked at my dad and I remember like it was yesterday. I said, Dad, I'm never going to be like you. And he said, son, we were just trying to protect you so you could focus on school and your life. And I say, I understand your why. I'm not saying you're wrong, but it doesn't change how I felt lied to and I felt betrayed. And then I began to even take it one step deeper. God and Jesus, if you're so good and you're so loving and there's grace and there's mercy and you want to bless me and you want me to have a great life and an abundant life and you're for me and you're not against me, why is this happening in my life? And I blamed him for everything. But you know what my parents taught me to do so well? And many of us do it well too. They taught me how to put on my mask. They taught me how to put on my fake face and my fake smile and act like everything was okay and go to school and go to my middle school and go to my high school and walk the walk and talk the talk and look the part. And I watched my parents. I learned it from them. They didn't talk about the problems. I didn't know as a young man growing up that it's okay to not be okay. And so I had to wear this mask and put this image and I thought this mask was keeping me safe. You see, if I could describe my life to you as a picture, if I could hand every one of you a picture of my life, and this picture would be a description of who I was, on the surface, it would seem like I'm sitting on the beach and my toes would be in the most white, pristine sand, and the ocean waters would be aqua blue and crystal clear, and the sunsets would be yellows and oranges and majestic. The picture would look perfect, but below the ocean waters was darkness and depth and predators and prey, and I was screaming, but I was silent. I wore the mask, and I blamed it on God, and I blamed it on everybody else. And I would go through my life, and I would go through my day in middle school and high school and my early 20s, acting like I was okay, and I wasn't. But I was so afraid to talk to anybody about my struggles and my hurts and my pains. And I began to walk away from good friends in middle school, and I began to surround myself with people, because what happened is literally I became a hater of God. I became somebody like, I don't want to hear about your Jesus. I don't want to hear about any of that. That stuff's silly. It's goofy. It's for this. It's for that. It's not for me. And I ran from it. And the truth is, what happened is that, see, every one of us that are breathing in air right now, we truthfully like it, love it, or leave it. We were born to worship. And we will worship something. We will put something on a pedestal. We will put something above us. We will look to something and see what happened when I walked away from my youth group and I walked away from the people that could encourage me and that could support me and that were trying to speak life into me, my youth pastors and my good friends. I began to have these holes and these voids and these empty spaces. And I went to middle school, and as I got to high school, I started experimenting with drugs and with alcohol because I needed something to cover the hole, something to plug the void. And I wasn't filled there. And then I started chasing after girls, and it wasn't filled there. And I was picked on and bullied, and I was trying to fit in because I needed all of you to accept me. And pressure is real. And if we don't find the healthy way to talk about the social and the emotional pressure busts pipes. And if pressure isn't dealt with the way people are supposed to deal with pressure, if pressure isn't dealt with the way that the youth and the adults, young and old alike, are supposed to deal with pressure, danger, destruction, and disasters can happen. And that's just real. The next thing that happens is in my high school journey, I started off being a straight A student, voted as a freshman, probably going to be the most successful freshman in my class of 2,600 kids in my little school of Marion, Indiana. And by the time I was a senior, I was kicked out of school. Drugs and alcohol had consumed me. I started compromising who I was. I gave into the pressure. Not only than that I battled with the hurts and the pains and the verbal abuse that I had taken. And I let those words take root in my heart. And they gave me nicknames. And I remember there was the time that the depression and the anxiety and those things became real. And it would wrap around me almost like it was a noose and it was this rope. And like I was a mummy being wrapped up, because depression wants to wrap around you like tentacles and hold you hostage. And I remember that I began to believe as a young man, I had passion and I was driven, but I began to compromise and I walked away from God, and I was operating from my hurts and my pains, and I wore my mask of fear to reach out. Suicidal thoughts. I remember when I was 18 years old. Go to that next slide if you would, please. There's a slide here. This is me on the left at 18 years old. That picture on your left is me at 18 years old, hurting young man on the brink of probably losing his life. That's a young man one heartbeat away from probably a drug overdose. That's a young man bound by hurts and pains, angry at God, looking to the world, looking to every other thing except the one true hope that can set me free. That's a young man that right at that point in time, I had just climbed the ladder in the garage of my sister's house, ring by rung to the top, and I grab the rope and I wrap it around my neck. That's a young man that today I can still look at my hands and I can see the cuts and the burns and the wounds. I can still see the issues and especially the burn marks from self-harm. And I know there's a lot of us in here that even though maybe we go to youth group, and maybe even though that we have this relationship with Jesus and we say that we're a Christian and that we love God, it doesn't change the fact that when you're by yourself and you're in your bedroom and you look in the mirror, you don't see what others see or saying about you. You see brokenness and you see depression and you see lies and you battle suicidal thoughts and you deal with maybe self-harming and maybe you're turning to drugs and alcohol because you're trying to mask the hurts and the pains, and this thing begins to grow and it festers and it gets bigger and it gets bigger. And that's just real too. And some of us that are in youth groups, and some of us that aren't in youth groups, and some of us that know God or those that don't know God, man, we are so afraid and we let fear paralyze us from speaking up and speaking out. We let things hold us hostage because what will others think about us? And so whispers continue to build. Let me just say it this way. How many of you in here, and I'm not talking about you specifically, let me say it this way. How many of you have you in the last 6 months, the last year, how many of you have you heard, and maybe it's you, but we'll mask it as in this way because we're talking about how many of you do you know somebody in your circle, somebody in your community, a friend, a family member. You've heard them talking about the thoughts of maybe committing suicide and ending their life. Raise your hand. Yeah, man, all across the room. And how many of you do you know somebody in your community, in your school, in your sphere, in your circle that battles with self-harm? Raise your hand. Yeah, man, hands all across the room. You see, these are battles and challenges that we all are facing. The good news is I promise you, the story doesn't end. The story doesn't end right then and there in my own personal life or any of us in here, because this is what I've learned. If you're in here tonight, and if you're a young man or a young lady or an old man or an old lady or somebody who doesn't want to admit their age, I have learned this. As long as there is breath in your lungs, and I promise you, I am the most unqualified and God has qualified. I'm the most unwise and God's using me to confound the wise. I'm the broken, I'm a hurting. I was this young man that just said, God, use me. Listen, if you're in here tonight, I promise you this, if there is breath in your lungs, there is hope in your heart. Period. If you're breathing in air, if you're breathing in oxygen, H2O, Gatorade. If you're breathing in water, if there's breath in your lungs, man. See, this is the great thing about God. Man, serving God, having a relationship with Jesus, it's fun, man. You see, it's not all dress right dress and shirt and tie and have to look a certain part and talk a certain way, man. Like, I love life. I refuse to just exist. I'm going to experience all that God has for me. If you're breathing in air, there's hope. Listen to me tonight, guys. I know, and I can see, I've been around a lot of people, and I can look in the eyes and I can tell when there's hurts and there's pains. And I want to say this again. Listen, do not let masks hold you hostage. At 18, when I was kicked out of school, I was still running from God. You couldn't talk to me about him. I didn't want to hear about him. I blamed him for everything in my family. My life spiraled out of control even more than what that picture was. I went to the Army and I got kicked out within a year. I stole $4,000 from my grandpa when he was having open heart surgery. Why? Because I had an addiction and I needed to feed it. I talk about drugs and alcohol it's like feeding a bear. Bear cubs are cute and they're cuddly. When a bear cub is small, it looks so innocent. It looks like it can't hurt you. But when you feed the addiction, that lie from the enemy, the bear grows up, and a grizzly bear on its hind legs at 12 foot tall as a grown-up adult isn't cute and it's not cuddly, and it will kill you.
Come on now.
And you will begin to make choices and decisions that really isn't part of your character, because this oppression. You see, drugs and alcohol, I call it for what it is. It's not of you. It's a trick of the enemy to hold you hostage, to give you a counterfeit. You see, the enemy is all about giving you counterfeits. He wants to give you things that look and feel and seem like it, but it always leaves you empty and void inside. You see, suicide for some seem like it's an option and a way out, but it's a counterfeit because it will never solve anything. Self-harm at the time, you may think that it's going to help you release your pain and your hurts, and this is how you begin to cope, but you wake up every single morning and it never solved anything. These are all counterfeits. These are all lies and whispers and tricks from the enemy trying to keep you away from the one thing that can set you free. And I was kicked out of school and I went to the Army, was kicked out of the Army, and I stole $4,000 from my grandpa when I was 21 years old. And I was 23 at the time, and after a few years still living in my hometown and still running from God, and just a young man that used to have dreams and goals, and I gave up on all of those because people had labeled me, and I began to believe the lies of the label. You're not what people say about you. You're not what your parent maybe says about you. You're not what somebody who doesn't like you says about you. You're not what others are saying about you. You are what the Bible and what God says about you, and you are fearfully and wonderfully made. And you were made for a purpose, and God's plan is to prosper you. God's plan is to prosper every single one of us, and no weapon formed against us shall prosper. And the enemy may send weapons, but I promise you those weapons cannot prevail, because you plus God is always the majority. And at the end of the day, I mean it, I stand on it. As long as we're breathing, there is hope in our hearts. And don't you dare believe the lie that giving up's an option. I'm 23 years old. I was in my hometown drinking and driving, still partying. My friend Priscilla came to pick me up. And when she came to pick me up, she was going to be my DD. I don't know exactly what happened or why, but when we left there, she gave me the keys to her vehicle, and I drove away from the bar at 23 in 2009. And the next thing I remember is Priscilla, she screamed the words "tree," and I woke up in a hospital bed. And I woke up with police officers over top of me, and my mother next to me. On that night, I hit a tree at a high rate of speed. And upon impact, Priscilla was catapulted forward. She didn't have her seatbelt on. And she hit the windshield. And a case of beer that I had bought flew forward, and it pancaked her. And she slid like a rag doll to the floor. And as I woke up, and as my mom was there sharing, and as things began to evolve, and they didn't know who she was until I identified her because her cell phone was locked, and her ID wasn't in her purse, and she was fighting for her life until I was able to say it's Priscilla Owens. I don't know exactly what happened, but what I do know is that for some reason they didn't arrest me that morning, maybe because my ankle was broken and they didn't know if they wanted to charge me or how to charge me or pay for the hospital bill, or is it a DUI or a DUI with bodily injury. They released me and said, "We'll be in contact with you soon, Mr. Harmon." My mama said, "We'll bring him right to you." And in the car, my mom began to share what happened. And as I got home, I remember there was this moment that I got home and nobody would tell me anything. And my mom just let me know she's fighting for her life. Her neck had been broken. And here I am at 23. At 23, I should have been a senior just graduating college. At 23, maybe I should have been begin to get my second 4 years and get my master's degree. But at 23 years old, many of us should just be thriving in what God's called us to do. And here I was operating from my hurts and my pains and allowing the lies of depression to hold me hostage. And we'll talk about that here in a little bit, about depression, that I promise you, you must learn to punch depression in the face. And I will explain that in a little bit. When you feel the lies and you feel this thing trying to ensnare you and these things about like you're not good enough, you can't put on the music about how you hate life and go to your room and isolate. You need to punch it in the face, and you need to break out, and you need to call your friend. Even if it's a white knuckle, you need to say, "Hey, I'm struggling. Hey, youth pastor, I need to talk. Hey, mom, I need to let you know something." But you cannot isolate, because when you isolate, the enemy will manipulate and lie and make you think that there is no way out. And there is, man. There is. You have to punch depression in the face. The Word of God, His Word, His promises, His truth. But listen, He's super, we're natural. We can sit there and all you can do is read and read and read and read. But still, I know there's lots of times we study and we read and we have people telling you how valuable and how loved you are, but yet you still go to your room and you feel like nobody understands you and you feel like you're all alone. And you're like, I know what people are saying and I know what the Bible says, but I don't feel it. Listen, a clap takes two hands. A snap takes two fingers. Faith without works is dead. He is super. We are natural. We have to co-labor. We have to be willing to move. And what I've learned, I guess we're getting more into it right now because I'm just letting the Lord lead me right here. What I've learned is when I begin to actually see, what you do is what you believe. What we do as young men, old ladies, young ladies, people who don't want to admit their age, what we do is what we believe. And so even though people are telling you that you're fearfully made and God loves you and He formed you in your mother's womb and God's plan is to prosper you, and you read the promises that you're the head and not the tail and God has a plan in your life, we still don't feel it. But what I've realized, what I do is what I believe. And it's when I stopped having the pity and looking for everybody else to tell me and give me a word of encouragement, when I began to say, you know what? I'm saying, God, listen, I got to punch this thing in the face. I'm not going to isolate. I'm not going to just kind of be a recluse and listen to music that hates life, but I'm going to go out. And I realized this, when I began to be a person that tried to inspire others, when I began to try to become an encourager, even though I didn't feel it myself, when I began to look at people and say, hey, I want you to know you're a beautiful person, and I'm so appreciative of the answers that you give me in the math classes and when we talk, and I'm so grateful for your attitude. When you walk into the room, man, you make everybody feel better. See, you're smiling right now. You know why? Because encouragement feels good. And you know what just happened to me subconsciously and in my spirit? I began to realize what I do is what I believe. And now that I just saw you smiling, it gave me worth. My voice mattered. And what happens? What we do is what we believe. And the more we get in the game, even though we don't feel like it all the time, the more that we take up and say, hey, I want to encourage somebody. I want to pray for somebody. I want to give somebody a hug. I want to give somebody a random act of kindness. I want to make other people matter. I want to not make it about me, but I want to make it about others. And what happens is we begin to forget about all of our stuff and the poor pity me and my battles and my issues. And it's not that it's not there. I get it. But what happens is our focus shifts. We stay not inward, but we start to look outward. We get in the game, and before you know it, you realize it's been weeks and you're not battling with depression. It's been weeks and you haven't thought about suicide. It's been weeks and you haven't picked up the knife. It's been weeks and you haven't smoked the joint. It's been weeks and you haven't popped the pill, because you got into the game with God, because faith without works is dead. But when you do what you believe, things and powerful things of God's kingdom happens in your life. For real, man. Like, this is the key to breaking out of your depression. This is the key to breaking out of your anxiety, is that you've got to get in the game, man. There's a revival. We've been talking about revival for many of generations and many of years. But when I say there is a revival, I'm not saying a revival's coming. The revival was never supposed to stop. When Jesus was resurrected 2,000 years ago and He sent His Spirit, the revival was never supposed to stop. The revival, it's in you. You carry revival. It's your youth groups. It's you guys getting together and saying, hey, we're going to pray. We're going to fast. We're going to begin to believe what the book says can happen when God's people says it can happen. And it doesn't have to be from my pastor. It doesn't have to be from my parent. I can show you story after story, from Jeremiah to young men to young ladies in the scriptures, that say, God, use me. And He turned the world upside down. There's a big train of thought out there. Many of the disciples were in their teenage years when God called them. They were young men. Young. They hadn't been Christianized. They hadn't been told that this denomination's wrong and this denomination's right. They hadn't been infiltrated by the religious folk that was trying to use their position for power. Jesus met these young men at a young age and began to show them who they were and what they could do. Listen, young men and young ladies and old men and old ladies in here, I don't care who you are, when men and women begin just to seek God's face and to begin to get into the game, listen, I promise you, man, I promise you, like in this community, in this town, revival is here if you want it to be. It just takes you on your knees. It takes you saying, God, I'm a young man, I'm 12, I'm 14, I'm a young lady, I'm 15, I don't even know the whole book, but I have to know you. And when you begin to punch fear in the face and punch depression in the face, and that means just get active and saying, how can I serve? How can I, God, use me to encourage, use me to brighten somebody's day up. How can I walk into the room and to let others know they're valuable? I promise you it will change your life. That is the key spiritually and physically, how to overcome depression, addiction, anything. It's when you just get involved and you find accountability and you're willing to be transparent and you're willing to stay connected to your community because you're not an island. God will move. I didn't know all that in my journey though until lately. On that day, in July 17th, that night, after I got home and I read the papers and it said 2 lifeline, and I called the hospital and I called the jail and nobody would tell me. I remember I stayed up all night, probably similar to this bench right here, hope it doesn't break. My butt just got wet. It's okay. I'm like my daughter, 2 peas in the pod, her foot in the stool, my butt wet on the seat. God's good, man. I heard it. I'll do it too. Then you're not alone. But I sat there. And I said, God, if you're real, I know I've been running from you. Get me out of this and I promise I'll change. I'm probably the only person that's ever prayed that prayer. And the paper came the next morning. And I ripped it open. And the headlines read, crash, victim, dies. If you can hit that slide, please. Priscilla Owens, when I was 23, going on 10 years almost, she lost her life in an accident. She was a mother. She was 28. She had a young boy and a young girl. And my choices and my decisions, there's consequences for what we do. Yep. But God, man. Yeah. Her family, within 3 days of my wreck, contacted me. I had never met them before. Never had spoken to them. Didn't even know their names. And they said, we want to speak with Nathan Harmon. And what do you say? I'm sorry? They said, Nathan, before you say a word, we want to let you know. We knew when our daughter left here, she was supposed to be your designated driver, and we don't know what happened that night. But we just want you to know that we don't blame you. You're responsible, yes, but so is Priscilla. You both made some terrible choices that night. But we don't think one dumb choice should destroy 2 families' lives. And we want you to know we forgive you and we love you. And we're asking you to do us 2 things. Please don't let our daughter die for nothing and try to make the world a better place. And see, my mom has even shared with me since this all's happened, like, Nathan, I know like I'm supposed to forgive and this thing called grace, but if somebody had taken you or your sister out of my life, I don't know if I could forgive. Like, I don't know if I'm supposed, like justice, I would demand justice. And I can't say that that's wrong. But this family that weren't even necessarily the most Christian of people, they knew the Lord, but they weren't like actively pursuing God in the church. They just stepped in and said, we want you to know we forgive you. And as they were speaking to me, this word called grace and this word called mercy and forgiveness, it stopped being a concept in a book. It stopped being an idea that I read about. Grace became tangible. Grace became real. And grace became what God intended it to be the very power that can set us free. Yeah. Because grace in your life, isn't just words in a book. Right. It's an experience. Grace is meant for you to experience. And when you can think back on what God saved you from your addiction or your pride or your anger or your ugliness or whatever your battle personally is, God has touched that. And God's grace is meant to be power in our lives. And as his family was forgiving me, literally I heard this, I just heard the words like in my spirit, like, my love is sufficient for you. You can't outrun me. My love will always outrun your resistance. Like, and his family forgave me. And I said, yeah, I'll try to change the world and make the world a better place. I didn't even know what that meant. I didn't even really have like a relationship with Jesus yet because I was still really angry, but I knew that God was beginning to get involved in my situation. You see, God didn't cause it, but God can get involved in any situation and turn what the enemy meant for evil and turn it into good. God can get involved in any part of your story, in any part of your message, and I promise you, as long as you're breathing, there is hope in your heart. Like, God can take any point and place in your life if you allow him to. He will use that and he will transform it, and he will begin to use it as a weapon for you and not against you. The enemy tries to thwart and to kill and steal and to take you out, but God is here to give you an abundantly blessed, prosperous, amazing life. And like, following Jesus is the most amazing, radical, I'm telling you what, man, this is nothing what I really thought when I was growing up. Like, I love the Lord, man, and I serve him, and God sends me, and I'm on the move, and I'm doing this, and I'm doing that. And I'm like, dude, me and my family have no right doing any of this other than the fact that God has called it, and he has made the way, and he's opening up doors that no man can shut. And I just know at the end of the day, like, passionately pursuing Jesus, there is nothing like it. Who didn't forgive me was Indiana. And at 23 years old, I was sentenced to 15 years in prison. And I said, God, I know you're in my life. I know you're involved in invest. Can we get the keys out going for a little bit? Keys, back there. Hello? Is she back there? Oh, there she is. Yeah. I hit her real quick, right? I didn't give her prep work. I didn't like give her a wink or a signal. I just say, hey, keys. I can play, but it sounds terrible. And we're not really quite near done yet, so don't think that. I'm not prepping you. You know, can I side note, squirrel. See, I still squirrel sometimes. Worship is so powerful. Listen, I was doing a study, crazy little word of knowledge here, study in the Hebrew, because I like Hebrew. The word worship, and there's a Hebrew word called shakah. It's the Hebrew word for worship. And in Hebrew, like A, B, C, D, like A for apple, B for banana, C for cat. Every Hebrew letter has a meaning behind it. The word shakah in the Hebrew is 3 letters. It's the letter shin, it's the letter het, and it's the letter hey. Say it slow or it'll sound really bad. The letter shin, the letter het, the letter hey. The letter shin means to destroy. The letter hey, no, the letter shin means to destroy. The letter het means to fence you in. And hey is to pour glory. You see, worship is supposed to destroy the things of the world. Fence you in so God can pour in. That's why if you ever read your Bible, and I hope you read your Bible, there's a story they send the worshipers out before the army in Israel because the power of worship will destroy, fence you in, that's my bad fence, and pour into you. We serve an awesome God, guys. I said, God, I have to know you. I know you're in my story. I know you've gotten involved, and I'm so thankful. But if I go after this, I go after everything like full tilt. I have one speed, squirrel. I have to know you. And my next step, spiritually, put my seatbelt on. Because if you're in here tonight, first off, as we move through this last piece of the time that I have. If you're here tonight and you're battling addiction, if you're battling suicide, if you're battling depression, if you're battling like the mask, you're battling anger, hate, bitterness, I promise you, God is able. Somehow, some way, God is able. I said, God, I got to know you. I'm all in, but please let me know how real you are. I told my mama in this prison cell when I was facing 15 years, I said, Mom, I need you to send me a Bible. Like my first time ever to have like a leather-bound Bible, something about it. I've had paperbacks when I was younger, but I want like a leather-bound Bible. Make it a study Bible because I don't know what I'm doing. And make it this specific one. And I was still working on self-control and like that. And I said, besides just one Bible, can you send me two? There's this little tiny Bible I saw Luke Giglio preach out of one time. I want one like him. So I need a big one, I need a little one. Both leather bound, please and thank you. And she sent me this Bible, this very one. I get it 10 years ago. Priscilla Owens is who lost her life, and her family asked me to not let her die for nothing and try to make the world a better place. And then I got God involved in my story, and it wasn't just to try to make the world a better place and to change the world, but it was to begin to, I knew that God was going to write a story that was so big that people couldn't deny his existence. And that you may be a hater of God and you may be angry at God, but you can't walk out after hearing a story like this if you can't say that he's not real. I promise you. And so Priscilla Owens meant a lot to me because we hit this tree and she died. And there's a parable that Jesus says, if a seed stays alive, it remains alone. But if the seed falls into the ground, it can multiply. And God was using my story and how his mercy and grace got involved. And I saw the picture that, through the death of Priscilla, personally, God was showing me his death and what he can do and his power and his grace. Priscilla Owens just meant a lot, her name to me, as I was processing forgiving myself. And so I was going, when I get out and I was on fire, whenever I got released, like I was going to try to change the world and make the world a better place. And then God got involved. But I needed this Bible because I know I needed to know him. And this was every answer we need in life is in here. Right. Everyone. Yes. And I got this book, right, and I was excited. It came in the mail, and I don't know about you, but I've never been a guy, and I know it's important to learn about Jesus, and it's all about Jesus, like it is all about him. But for me, it's like sitting down and watching a movie. You don't start in the middle because you don't know the plot, you don't know the theme, you don't know anything about it. It never made sense to me when somebody, say, get this book and start in the middle. I get that, right? I say start in the middle. It's great to read about Jesus, but go to the front too, so you can understand the totality of who you are. And so I get this book and I'm like, I don't really know what's going on. And so how does this thing work? So let me go to the beginning. And when I say the beginning, I'm not talking about Genesis 1. I'm talking like table of contents. And I go to the introduction page of this love story written to me. The greatest love story ever written of mankind. And on my introduction page, the editor that printed on the printed press hundreds of thousands of copies of this Bible, he picked a poem. And there's a beautiful poem on my introduction page. And the poem says, give me the Bible, holy message. Don't change that yet. Don't do that. Give me the Bible, holy message shining. The light shall guide me in the narrow way, precept and promise, law and love combining till night vanishes in the eternal day. And it was written by a hymn writer from the 1800s. And listen, there are 7 billion people on this planet, hundreds of thousands of names. I don't know the mathematical statistics. I'm not a statisticologist. It's a word I made up. But listen, I'm not that guy. I don't study stats. But what I do know is when I read and I saw the author of this poem as I sit in prison, sentenced to 15 years, and as I cry out to God to show me who you are, and I get this Bible and I go to the introduction page, hit that please. I had a poem written by a woman named Priscilla Owens, the very name of the woman that died in my wreck. Listen, bro. But God. You know, I didn't serve 15 years. I got released in 3 years and 9 months. Why? Because God can take whatever circumstance that you're in. He's not held to your circumstance. Him plus you will always be the majority. And when you begin to allow him to work, he makes the impossible possible. He takes the impractical and makes it reality. He takes promises that you can't see and makes them real. You just got to say, God, use me, send me. God, I got a vision. I got a mission. I think that you've called me to be a preacher. I think you've called me to be an evangelist. I think you've called me just to be an entrepreneur. I think you've called me to get into science and to be a doctor. God, I think you've called me to be a social worker or counselor. I think you've called me, God, just to go out there and wherever I go, like I just want people to know whatever room that I walk into, like that you're a part of my story. I want to give you honor and glory. And God began to move in my life. While I was incarcerated, I was traveling all across the state of Indiana. Literally, I would leave the prison while still locked up, and I would go all across the state of Indiana, and I spoke to over 5,000 to 7,000 civilians, and I would be in street clothes. I would leave the prison, put on street clothes, and go and communicate because an opportunity opened up, and God's favor isn't fair. And I traveled the whole state. In 3 years and 9 months, I got a letter from the governor saying this young man is different. He has changed. He can do more out there than he can in there. And I walked out the prison doors. And when I walked out the prison doors, because God is able, he is super, and we are natural, and he can do anything in our lives. And I came home and I came face to face with people in my hometown that said, Nathan, you're a failure. You're never going to change. We know who you've always been. It's only a matter of time. And I used to get so offended. I used to get so upset when people didn't believe in me. But and in that journey, I realized I stopped caring about the opinions of people. I'm not what you say I am. I am who he says I am. And he is for me. He's not against me. No weapon formed against me. I'm the head. I'm not the tail. The devil, you can come to try to still kill and destroy, but I'm not going to give you any root, any seed, any thought. You're not going to live rent free in my brain. I'm not going to go isolate. I know I'm not an island. I'm going to open up my mouth. I won't wear my mask. I will speak up and I will speak out because I know God has kept me and my life speaks for his glory. And I said, you know what, in my hometown, listen, I'm not any of, yep, you're right. Maybe I'm not the most qualified, and you know what, you don't have to believe in me, but I'm going to go, and I'm going to let God just lead and guide me. And I got into one school 4.5 years ago. And one school turned to 10, and 10 turned to 30, and 30 turned to 72, and 70 turned to 135 last year. And I became the #1 book school speaker in the nation. And this current school year, I'm going to be in over 240 schools all across this nation, all across this coast. And in the middle of that story, listen, when I first came out, as I began to move and to say, I trust you, God, I'm going to go all in. Literally, a young man, a friend of mine, a brother of mine, he said, Nate, I just want you to know, like, I was going to get rid of this vehicle, but God told me to give it to you. He threw me the keys. I said, bro, I don't get my license for many years. He said, I know, but listen, I was going to get rid of it, but I said, I'm supposed to give it to you. He had no idea the story. He gave me the exact make, the exact model, the exact color of the vehicle that I wrecked. I'm telling you, man, God is so real in your life. You know, only by his grace, I've became the top book school speaker in the country, and doors are opening. You know, July 17th and 18th, it'll be my 10 years since my wreck. And on that day, I didn't plan this. A pastor in London had just reached out to me and my team and said, hey, I saw some videos. We prayed and fasted. We need this young man to come and preach at our conference. And I will be speaking in London 10 years to the day of my wreck. Listen to me. I'm 10 years sober from every drug and alcohol. 10 years. I haven't white-knuckled it. I'm over 10 years sober from any thought of suicide. I haven't had to white-knuckle it. I'm over 10 years from any thought of self-harm. I haven't had to white-knuckle it. Listen, depression, and that, nope, not me, not me. Nope, I know my Father. I know who I am. And I refuse to isolate. I refuse. I will not put on this mask. I will not let the opinions of others hold me hostage. I'm telling you what, every single one of you here in Wisconsin, I don't even know what town or city or state, I mean, I know what state I'm in, but Marshfield, right? That's that, amen. Literally, we have to leave right after this, and I have to drive 10 hours to Kentucky-Indiana border. I'm out of high school in the morning. Listen, man, it's time for us to go. It's time for you guys to go. It's time for us to say, God, use me. And it doesn't take you being sophisticated. It doesn't take you having all the answers. It doesn't take you having all the knowledge. And listen, God doesn't call qualified. He qualifies though he calls. He takes broken, hurting young men and women, and he says, I want to use them, because when it's all said and done, when you see pictures of what I've recovered from, and when you see the family that God's blessed me with, and what God's called me to, and what I'm doing, the only thing you can say, God is able. Somehow, some way, I know God is going to make a move in my life. And all I have to do is to continue to pedal. He's got the wheel, and I'm just going to pedal. I'm just going to move. I refuse to look in the mirror and think of the lies. I've got to get active. And so tonight, listen. We know Father God, I just ask depression, anxiety, shut its mouth in Jesus' name. Listen to me, guys. If you're sitting in here right now and you know you're battling, you're battling. They're battling something. Depression, terrible anxiety, paralyzing fear, drugs and alcohol, suicidal thoughts. I don't care who you are, young or old alike. And I don't listen, man. The mass, the opinions, what will they think? None of that matters. First off, if that's you and you're in here and you know, like, man, he's been speaking right to my heart. Like, this is me. I want you to come up here with me this morning, right now. Like, right now, let's go. Get up here. Like, right now, let's go. If that's you, come on. If that's you, come on. I don't care who you are. If that's you, come on. If that's you, come on. Young or old, who cares? Take off your mask. Take off your identity. Take off, like, what people think about you. If that's you, come on. If that's you, come on. If that's you, come on. Yep. Absolutely. Yep. Suicide, you're a liar from the pit of hell. Yep. Yeah, man. We serve an awesome God, man. And I know it doesn't always feel good. And listen to me. Serving Jesus and serving God doesn't mean everything gets easy. Nope, the Bible says count it all joy when we go through various trials. Like, that verse, to me, that verse sucks, man. Like, what? Like, I'm just real, right? Like, that, I don't like that verse. I don't want that verse. Like, count it all joy when I'm going through stuff. I don't know. But I've learned, man, it's through storms and trials. It's through the winds of life. It's what causes our roots to go deep. Without wind, without storms, we have no root system. And if we have no root system, we can't stand. Listen, if things haven't been the greatest, if home life hasn't been the best, if you've battled with emotional, social, and physical abuse in your story, in your journey, if you've had thoughts of giving up, if you've compromised yourself and you've given into the drugs and to the alcohol, and you know at the end of the day, it's just because you're masking hurts and pains, whatever those things have been. Listen, there's no guilt, there's no shame. God, when you've been through this journey and where you're at right now today, everything that you've been through, it's just giving you roots, it's giving you depth because you've been through some things, you've had to withstand some things, you've had to struggle with some things. Character has been being developed. Your perseverance, your tenacity, your grit, your ability to stand when all you can do, you stand. And I praise God for that. We're all beautifully broken. We're all beautifully broken. Somehow, some way. And if you're here, and if you're here with a youth group, or if you're here and with a parent or a mentor or a pastor, or if you're here and you don't have one of those, there are pastors, there are parents, there are people here. But if you're up here today, listen, I need you. You've got to do this. See, what you do is what we believe. He's super, we're natural. You need to take time to make it a priority to talk with your mentor, your pastor, your coach, your peer, someone. You've got to begin to talk about this thing. This isn't your weight to carry on your own. You're not by yourself, man. Like, I'm right there in the middle of it with you, man. This is us, and it's we, and it's together, and we're going to work, and we're going to thrive, and we're going to let God use us. And I promise you, a young generation of broken young men and women that are just hungry and that are sick and tired of the lies of the enemy, God is going to begin to rise up warriors, that giants are going to still be slain.